Alright, we're just gonna get right into it. You clicked on this video, so you must be here for one reason. Honkai Impact for Dummies. I mean, my breakdown of Honkai Impact, chapter by chapter. So the first things this game directly tells you is that a battleship has something called a Honkai reactor, and it's approaching Sapphire. The name of this first stage is Urgent Mission. So I guess you've learned what exactly is so urgent about your mission. What it doesn't tell you is that Sapphire is the name of the city you're currently in, so don't get that confused with the Blue Rock. It then promptly drops you into a stage as Kiana, where you immediately start kicking some enemy butt. A rather exciting start as you literally shoot first and ask questions later. But I wouldn't at all blame anyone who may have felt something along the lines of, "I have no idea what's going on!" But that was fun. So after you've somewhat learned how to make your legs work and move around, the next thing the game tells you is the battleship can instantly kill all 30 million residents of Sapphire City. I can't even count that high. I guess our urgent mission suddenly has a lot more legitimate weight to it. Shixel must prevent the ship from crashing. Again, the game falls just shy of fully cluing you in on what's what, but Shixel is the name of the organization you are a part of. You obviously want to stop the battleship from crashing and wiping out Sapphire City. What you probably shouldn't do as a game designer after telling the player all of this is immediately show something crashing. Fortunately, this wasn't the target battleship, and instead what you did see was the aircraft Kiana was on top of in the previous stage crash into a building. But don't worry, she's okay. What I do like about all of this is it justifies the new change of scenery Kiana finds herself in, being the destroyed building we just saw. Here on top of the plane flying through the city is stage 1, and here in this ruined building is stage 2. It also helps establish that Kiana can be a bit irresponsible and reckless in regards to her collateral of her surroundings and her equipment, as well as simultaneously establishing a connection with her teammates. We're introduced to Himiko, who is a bit perturbed by Kiana's conduct, but she knows disciplinary action can't take priority over this mission, and immediately gets Kiana a new ride as the fate of the city, now properly referred to in-game as Sapphire, hangs in the balance. This brings us to the next cutscene of Kiana in the rendezvous position and then back on board her newly prepared aircraft. But I want to backtrack just a bit to Kiana's line before. There's no voiced audio, but we can tell by how her dialogue is written that Kiana is a little ashamed to report to Himiko that her aircraft was destroyed. It shows Kiana isn't too prideful to admit her mistakes and will ask for assistance if she really needs it. And in Himiko's singular groan, we can infer that Himiko's not really surprised, but still a little disappointed. This almost certainly wasn't the first time something like this has happened, and Himiko has just kind of accepted it as a part of working with Kiana by now. Kiana isn't malicious, but she can be immature, which may get her into a little more trouble than is needed. I'm not going to be breaking down every single scene to this degree, but I need to establish that this is a prime example of how MiHoYo will be telling the story in terms of it being both a blessing and a curse. It's pretty amazing how much insight can be packed into a tiny little scene, but the problem is, it's heavily clashing with the fact that this is a tutorial stage for new players who know absolutely nothing on how the game plays or how the world they find themselves playing in works. These first few stages aren't anything fancy, just a small ship the player can move around on, followed by a bigger space the player needs to move to certain spots to progress the level further, outfitted with an attempt to make the player immediately feel engaged by the story and not be bored by a bland traditional tutorial. I personally greatly appreciate how MiHoYo heavily leans into the method of showing over telling, but it can be slightly problematic when they show something the player asks, "Hey, what was that?" and the game just kinda goes, "Don't worry about it," or "You'll find out later." You're absolutely going to lose some people in the dust going at such a brisk pace, and they may not like that response when they just had a super simple question that couldn't bother to be answered. There's a lot going on all at the same time, with the player learning and reading interchanging bits of dialogue, tips, and instructions that quickly flash up and fade away, and expecting the player to comprehend and compartmentalize all of these bits of stimulation, all the while fighting for their lives and beating up baddies. But worry not. That's exactly why I'm here. Just wanted to clue you in on how things might be working, as there's going to be lots of breadcrumbs you may not know what to do with, and I'll try my best to let you know which ones will be more important than others. But without further ado, let's finally move on. Stage 3, we learn two whats, being what the name of the battleship is, the Selene, and we learn what happens if it crashes. It would unleash a Honkai Armageddon. As for the how and why, there isn't currently enough sensible information for that to really make sense, but just like how that sounds bad, just know that it is bad, and you don't want that to happen. It's almost as if the Selene were to crash, there would be a Honkai Impact of sorts. Nah, probably not. Anyway, it's mostly another tutorial, and this time the added layer is seeing if the player can handle a bigger and stronger enemy. Disregard my one-shotting them. But you can see that rather than destroying it like the smaller enemies, it retreats back into the sky. Super small fun fact, the name Selene belongs to the Greek goddess of the moon, and she's also the sister of Helios, the sun god, and daughter of the titan Hyperion. And those names may sound vaguely familiar to you because if you recall from one of the very first loading cutscenes where Kiana deployed from the sky, you can hear Himiko over comms contacting another ship, the Helios, from the ship that she was on, the Hyperion.
Helios, こちら Hyperion. 状況を報告せよ.
So that's why this third stage is called Moon Chaser, and why the game mentions the Selene has a poetic name. Next, we learn more about Kiana's relations with her team and that Himiko has a degree of authority over her as a major, even if Kiana affectionately disregards it most of the time. And just how important another member we haven't met yet named Mei is to Kiana. But wouldn't you know it, we get a transmission from Mei. This fifth stage tells the player that there may be shifts in perspective, but it doesn't really change how the game plays too much, besides a slightly different presentation. Stage 6, the game kind of has a slight immersion break to directly inform the player that type advantages exist, yet unfortunately doesn't really explain how what relates to what at the moment. We also see Kiana doesn't really enjoy being patronized like a child, yet being immature about it doesn't really do her any favors in her defense. It's at least nice to see that different characters will have different playstyles. With the ending banter, we learn Mei is the cautious type that likes to be prepared and efficient, which she probably has to be just to balance out Kiana, who is the total opposite, but why they can work so well together to cover each other's strengths and weaknesses. Stage 7 is the first stage that's kind of play fluff so the player has something to do. I personally don't mind, as Honkai Impact is a very enjoyable action beat-em-up to me, and stages like these don't occur too frequently. It could be argued that the purpose is the Valkyries are progressing further along the ship, but in terms of narrative, the stage doesn't really offer anything. Most stages will at least have something to contribute to the story, even if it's a very small addition or portrayal of character. Stage 8, we see Kiana getting a bit too arrogant and complacent just because things are going well and she's with her beloved Mei. But wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden things are not going so well. And that previous big Honkai you defeated, whom Himiko earlier designated as what's called an Emperor-class Honkai beast, is now back with a vengeance. Unfortunately, MiHoYo pulls a storytelling pet peeve of mine, and to borrow a quote from Video Game Donkey, you win the battle but lose the cutscene. It's always a bit jarring to me, especially when there are perfectly good ways to do scripted losses, but I digress. Mei steps up and reveals her trump card, and for the first time the game drops the H word on you. No, not Honkai. The other H word. Hersher. I'll wait till the game explains it more thoroughly later, but just know that any time that word gets used, it's a pretty big deal in terms of power. And speaking of power, Mei displays quite a bit as she easily overwhelms the Emperor-class Honkai. I mean, not that we were in any danger as we already You know what? Let's just move on. Mei, who seemed to be the cool, calm, and collected type, seems to have snapped a bit and is acting almost like an entirely different person. And speaking of different person, we cut over to a new character who seems to know Kiana and Mei, and whose name seems to be Bronya. But I bet you couldn't figure out why that might be, so you're welcome. For now, all you really need to know is Bronya is the team hacker, the I'm in girl, and that's literally the first thing we see her do as she unlocks the security on a door for Kiana and Mei. Stage 11 is a very subtle shift from Act 2 to 3, but it's honestly pretty arbitrary. I only mention this just so no one overly focuses on the division of the chapters by acts, as it's not always gonna matter, but it doesn't hurt to keep note of them by any means. Another subtle occurrence is that this is the second time the game drops the name Shixel, and the first time mentioning a group that opposes them, Anti-Entropy. The Valkyries discuss that part of the reason Bronya is able to easily hack the systems of the Selene is because it's using anti-entropy technology, and Bronya used to be part of that group. What I find odd is that there's never any mention of the fact that you are all part of Shixel. They just said the name but never give you any indication of what it is and why it's important to you. It's kinda nice they're trusting the viewer to be big brain enough to understand from their small inferences, but a proper introduction helps leave a lasting impression. It's quite alright if none of this really means much to you for the time being, as there will be much more to latch onto later. Skipping towards the end of the chapter when the Valkyries finally reach the Selene Core control panel, the game throws its most important cryptic clues yet. Bronya does her hacker shtick like always, while Himiko does offer her words of caution that there may be Trojans. Bronya manages to find a suspicious email addressed to Kiana telling her to rule the world, and in order to do so, she must find 4 keys. Lightning of Conquest, Fire of Affliction, Storm of Desire, and Death of Tranquility. These all sound familiar to Himiko, but she can't quite pinpoint why. Just keep the concept of these 4 keys tucked away for now. Besides, we've got bigger things to worry about since our hacker got hacked. If only she had been more careful like Himiko told her. Presented with our first real boss fight, Dark Bronya is appropriately way more challenging than anything fought thus far. Just discount my playthrough as I'm way higher level than is expected for this early game, but just take my word for it, she's actually pretty tough. We bring Bronya back to her senses, and with the Selene now under our control, we're headed to a place called St. Freya, which we'll learn all about next chapter. But as of now, the most important takeaways from this first chapter are learning about our new cast of characters. Kiana, our happy-go-lucky protagonist, Mei, who has some kind of Hersher connection, Bronya, who used to be part of Anti-Entropy, and Himiko, whom everyone should always listen to. They're all part of the organization Shixel. They're at odds with another organization called Anti-Entropy. And there are 4 keys that exist. Hopefully that's not too much to hold on to all at once, as we're going to be adding even more on top of all of that next chapter. Sorry this summary ran a little long, but next time I won't have to bother with quite as much explanation. And as for the analysis, let me know if that is of interest, or if I should stick with more of an emphasis on keeping a summarization short and sweet. But this has been the Gingerbread Man, and you can catch me in the next video as we brace for more Honkai Impact.